I would like to begin to acknowledge the indigenous peoples of the land that we are on today. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving our relationships with the nations and improving our own understanding of the nations, the local indigenous people and their culture. So from coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the Métis, Inuit, and the First Nations people who have called this place home for generations beyond measure. Thank you, Trevor.
Good morning. My name is Trevor Cartwright. I'm the founder of Coraggio Group, and we are a Portland-based destination strategy and organizational change firm. And we have the good fortune of working with lots of great clients, primarily in the United States. And it's my pleasure to be here today, along with my colleagues from Miles Partnership, who is our parent company. You know, I've been reminded just throughout the last few days, as I'm sure each of you has, as you've listened to some of the great conversations we're having about what an important time this is, what a starting point for some of this may be. This might be a midpoint for others. I know we have destinations who are at different places in their journey, and I just want to say that regardless of where you're at, as long as you're in it and you're on the journey, you're exactly where you need to be. You are exactly where you need to be. So keep with it. I think it's clear that destination leaders and their organizations worldwide are embracing a completely new level of responsibility. I think of it as a higher calling that's something bigger than occupancy rates and visitor volume and economic impact. And although those things are still important, of course, we know as leaders and we understand that our collective work and the decisions we make as industry influencers impacts residents, the communities they live in, the quality of life, and the natural environment and cultural resources that they enjoy. This reality requires something very different from all destination leaders and our organizations. It requires that each of us has the courage to start the important conversations that are waiting to be had, and most important, having the courage to stick with those conversations and lead the way to a more accountable future for tourism. Today, we'll have the opportunity to have a conversation with four such courageous leaders and the steps they're taking and how they're thinking about the importance of becoming a destination organization of the future and what that means to them. I'd like to introduce our four panelists that I am just thrilled to share the stage with today. First up is Sina Ljungstedt, who is the founding partner and CEO of Copenhagen-based Group Now. Next to her is Antonia Kudijk, who's the director for North American for NBTC, which is the Netherlands Board of Tourism and Conventions. And I should mention that Jas Vranken, if you were at the Global All-Stars conversation yesterday, you know that unfortunately he contracted COVID right before getting on the plane. And luckily we have Antonia here today to help us out. And so thank you very much for being here with us. Next, we have Grayson Chungeth, who is a Senior Vice President of Destination Development for Destination Canada. And then next, a good friend of our firm, Adam Burke, who is President and CEO of the Los Angeles Tourism and Convention Board. So welcome and thank you for your time, your commitment, and your leadership. I'm excited for our conversation today. But before we start, we want to include all of you in a conversation, a quick poll actually. So this is going to require that you raise your hands. This is a moment of truth where we're going to kind of gauge where you might be on your journey. So here are 5 questions that we believe are important components on the journey ahead when we think about transitioning from destination marketing to destination management to maybe even higher calling of destination stewardship. So these are the questions, and just know I'm going to ask by a show of hands where folks are at on these. So the first one is when you think about the journey, having a bold vision for how your destination will evolve. Second, an updated mission that acknowledges the importance of tourism's economic, sociocultural, and economic impact. Third, a reliable source of dedicated funding. I know that's important for everybody. Next, an actionable strategic plan and the resources to implement it. And then last, a meaningful, ongoing engagement with local residents and businesses. So there are so many other things that you might find along the journey to evolving to the destination of the future. But I'm wondering, by a show of hands, how many of you have all 5 of these nailed? Oh my gosh, that's great. Thank you. Now that is the truth. That's truthful. Okay. How many of you have 4 or 3 where you're pretty confident you've got them? Okay. Good. And then last, 2 or just 1 of these where you're starting to feel good. Okay. Fantastic. That gives us a little bit of a sense for where we're at. Hopefully, panelists, that gives you a sense as well. I'm going to move over here now. Wow. I've been waiting for this day. Thank you for being here. I want to mention that we will have the opportunity for the audience to ask questions. So as we have the conversation, if you have questions, write them down, and we'll set aside some time to ask as many of them as we can in the 45 minutes total that we have. This will probably fly by, but please keep track of those. So the first question I have, and we'll start with Sina on this. This is a imagine question, kind of the elevator pitch question. So if you can imagine that you just got on the elevator, and on that elevator, waiting for you, was a very important stakeholder. Now this could be a board chair for your organization. For you, it might be a really important client. You have 90 seconds before the door opens for your floor to make the case for why now is the right moment for DMOs to change in fundamental ways and evolve themselves and their priorities well beyond destination marketing. What would you say?
I think I would start with asking a question, and my question would be, did you see the headlines today? London is burning.
60 degrees.
Greenland, 60 degrees. London is burning. Heathrow is capping the number of passengers simply because they are maxed out. Schiphol in Amsterdam, the same. And so I think I would talk about the news. And I would say, so we're at that point now where we massively need to change the way that tourism works. And as part of that, as destination organizations, we need to match that. We need to reflect that in how we work, in the skill sets that we offer, and in the partners that we work together with. So I think that would be my short pitch. I'm on the 3rd floor, so it's...
The door is opening. Fantastic. Very compelling argument, absolutely. I'm sold. Thank you. Antonia.
The elevator in our building is a little slower, so my pitch is a little lengthier.
So we've got a high rise.
Yes, but I would indeed start with the news. What is going on in our lives at the moment? We are all aware, and we believe this is absolutely the right moment for DMOs to change in fundamental ways and move away from just marketing a destination. If we resist and keep pushing for those visitor numbers, we will soon no longer be relevant. And we believe that our industry has a bright future ahead together with all of us if we operate within the sustainability goals that have been defined, as well as taking our communities into account, which for the past years in our company has not been a strong focus. And of course, travel and tourism can play a big role in improving the world situation. However, we have to question to what extent we can really contribute. So be very focused, work together, and prepare ourselves for a journey that some of us have already started, and we are on it. We are in it together.
Fantastic. I'm also sold. Thank you, Antonia. Grayson, what would you say?
So in Canada, we're very much focused on 2 things simultaneously. One is, of course, recovery, ensuring that businesses are coming back, so they need to stay viable to be able to be in the long run. And the second one is resilience. And when I think about resilience, it's about how do we prepare for future shocks? And we're assuming there's going to be one shock at a time, and it could be multiple. And it's so how do we create that resilience in the future? Simultaneously, looking at how do we welcome high values guest. And when I say that values, I put the S on it to make sure that there is an alignment of values of the guest with the community. And then that leads to community. What does community mean? What is the aspiration of the community, and is it in alignment? And that means getting social license or agency from the community that we can practice tourism, and the way that tourism impacts them, they are fully aware and have bought into that.
It's an interesting distinction you're drawing between high value and high values when you're really looking to discover, what kind of visitor is most compatible with our destination. And I think that's getting to your point.
That's right.
Thank you. Adam.
And I'll piggyback off of that a bit. I would probably start with Darwin. Stick with me. For me, it would be, it's not the strongest.
This is a high rise.
We hope. It's not the strongest of the species, nor the most intelligent who survive. It's those who are most responsive to change. If the past 2.5 years have shown anything, it doesn't matter how strong you think your organization is. If you're not able to be agile and responsive to the multiple disruptions we're going to face, that's going to be a significant challenge. But going back to what we talked about yesterday in the main stage presentation, I think it's about being proactive, because the reality is none of us had a pandemic preparedness strategy, but if we've been paying attention to what the global scientific community was saying, we probably should have. So I think, my argument would be, we can either wait for an onslaught of disruptions to come our way, or we can actually engage now and help drive that conversation.
Thank you. And hopefully for our audience members, if you're a destination leader and you've got a board of directors, for example, if you're having a challenge, offering the idea of this evolution, maybe expanding beyond your current mission to take on some of these broader ideas. Some of these thoughts might be helpful in making the case and making one that's compelling. All right, let's go to the next question here, and Adam, we'll start with you on this one. So, building on your opening remarks, what, from your perspective, are a couple of priorities beyond destination marketing that you believe every destination organization, large or small, because we have every scale, I think, represented in the audience here, that you believe should be priorities that should be considered for taking on?
So again, knowing that it's something that should be applicable to any destination, I think the first thing is instill a sense of urgency. It goes back to the time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. We should have planted a tree 20 years ago on a lot of issues, climate change probably being chief among them. So I think number one is just instill a sense of urgency in your own organization, but also with your stakeholders, to recognize that if we don't really lean in on these issues, we're not going to have a sustainable industry, let alone the community and societal impacts. The second one, again, think very local from this perspective, because what might be the most compelling issues for us in LA might be very different for another destination. And I guess the contrast I'll draw, in an area like LA where there's so much density, one of the issues for us is, like a lot of urban destinations, homelessness, right? We can't avoid that and say we're just a tourism promotion agency. We can't own that problem, but we certainly should be contributing in very positive ways because we're stewards of our community. Whereas some of the small rural destinations who early in the pandemic suddenly saw a significant uptick in tourism, they were having to manage the fact that a lot of people in their community actually did not like this huge onslaught of visitors coming to really a very unspoiled part of the country. So I think the issue is it's going to run the gamut. I think you have to listen honestly to your community and actively engage with them on the issues that are most compelling in your particular destination.
Absolutely. Great advice. Thank you very much. Grayson, I'm wondering from your perspective.
I would follow up with the same thing, is that when we think, and we're a national organization, so I rely heavily on the local DMO to inform us about that, but it would come from, when you think about community, think about it's in its entirety, not just the mainstream, but think about marginalized, impoverished, new immigrants, indigenous groups who have lived there forever, to make sure that you're really thinking about the community at large, not just the community that is the tourism community because they're right there, because they almost come out as stakeholders and they have limited point of view. But if you think about when a visitor actually comes into your area, they're interacting with the entire community, and to ensure that that community has bought into what you are offering. And they are also they care about what is being showcased to the world, and they want to be proud about it. And let's ask them what it is rather than determining what it could be, rather coming from a responsive place. And it's okay to be responsive sometimes.
Don't assume, right? Ask the
That's right,
question.
yeah.
Very good. Antonia.
Well, we believe that we have a priority as far as being a thought leader, and we've done so over the past few years. A couple of years ago, we saw over-tourism coming, so talking about anticipating challenges, that's what was happening. We knew also based on the numbers that were, the predictions that were out there, more people are traveling globally, passport holders numbers are increasing. So we knew what to expect in some of our cities, and we launched our Perspective 2030 2 years ago. And I'm very happy we did. It took a lot of effort, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we also learned that we have to get everyone on board, and that's not always easy. So this plan came together with, by collaborating with all parties involved, and with all, I mean the stakeholders, partners, local government, federal government, although the federal government only signed on a year after we started the initiative. So we felt we really had to be very persistent and look at participation at all levels. And the sense of urgency right now is there. It's very clear while attending this conference that we need to act, and that we as a DMO, we can push forward, but only together and not by ourselves. And then, and that's in line with what I just said, practice what you preach. You know, you can have a whole theory about how to approach the issues, but also showcase what you have been doing, what partners and smaller businesses are already doing. And there are a lot of examples out there. I learned from Signe earlier this week, and we talked about how can you give all of us access to these examples so that we can all apply those examples to the benefit of the world, basically.
Thank you, and some of your comments just made me flash on, you know, there is such a sense of urgency for this work. This has only been reinforced through this conference, and I know in your own work. But that kind of the flip side of that is the endurance that you have to have, even though everything is so urgent, truly urgent. So in many ways, it's an endurance run. We have to have the endurance as leaders to stick with it and stick with the people who need to understand and to need to be on board and to include them in the process. Having that stick-to-itiveness, I think, is a key component of leading this work.
And Trevor, if I can pick up on that, Signe, before you talk, I really want to recognize what you did yesterday, because I think one of the themes I'm starting to hear us talk about is we have to be bold in terms of our leadership, because often we're the ones who are probably best positioned in our communities to be the conveners and the facilitators. That means being bold and pushing for the change we need to see now, because what I greatly appreciated about your presentation yesterday, Signe, was you called out the reality of where we're at. If you look at, and I'll count us among them, U.S. destinations are dramatically behind the curve on European destinations around issues of sustainability. And I think one of the visuals you put up pretty, you know, it was a very powerful illustration that we're still arguing about, are we destination marketing organizations or destination management organizations, whereas 90% of the work is over here. So I just really applaud you for calling out that truth.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adam. What are your thoughts?
I don't know what to add now, but no, I think sustainability leadership is one in terms of what you should be prioritizing and looking at. And I think as part of that, and that's a little bit going back to what I was saying yesterday, and I think we get stuck a little bit in this wrongful opposition of management and marketing, and I would, and I have been a proponent of that in Copenhagen as well, those discussions. But I think in many ways, marketing communication is the superpower of many of the organizations in this room today. And I think that's great. I mean, we should celebrate that. But we should also think about how we deploy that superpower.
I think they're celebrating next door.
I think they're celebrating it. But I think it's also about how we deploy what we're really good at in new ways, and to communicate sustainability leadership, to have that communication or that conversation with your community, but also with your industry stakeholders, because you need that buy-in. As you're saying, the destination organization is potentially well positioned to have that conversation or to be the facilitator of getting there. And I say potentially because I think it has to be a very conscious leadership decision. It's not something that is naturally defined or given that you will be in that position. There are probably other organizations as well that are waiting to get there. So I think that's one. But I would also build on what you were saying, Grace, and again, deploying that superpower, if you will. I think there is a really interesting example from Amsterdam that came out during the pandemic sort of high season, where Amsterdam a couple of years ago, of course, I think is globally known to have had over-tourism issues. And so they came out, the Amsterdam and partners came out and said, we're not going to do any marketing anymore because we don't work to attract more visitors. But then actually during the pandemic, they came out and said, actually, we're going to take back our own narrative. We're going to take back how we define, how we narrate our destination, because it is becoming defined by everyone else, by all the visitors coming from the outside, by all the industry that's not necessarily invested in our community. And so they want to take back the narrative, and by doing that also define that narrative along with the community and the values that they represent. One of those values that they're really focusing on is freedom, and how that freedom comes with responsibility. So I think that's just an example of how deploying your superpower of marketing actually goes to still support and empower some of the agendas we're talking about up here.
Yeah, so it's not about walking away from marketing. It's about leveraging it in a different way that has a different kind of influence, power, impact.
Yeah, I might be able to give you an example. During the pandemic, of course, everything came to a standstill, but we knew that the Dutch people were able to move around. And we said, yeah, marketing is a no in a way. However, we would like to make sure that they're going to the right places and that they're spreading around the country instead of all going to Amsterdam and visit one of the museums. So we successfully launched a social media communication plan campaign. Sometimes you just have to adjust the wording a little bit to not stir the pot too much. You have to be here. It was a campaign for the visitors. Hashtag hier moet je zijn, you have to be here. And we got tremendous response from Dutch travelers and also local businesses who were participating, and Dutch travelers highlighting the unbeaten path that they had tracked on. So it was a great way to showcase what else is out there without us taking the lead other than providing the platform.
Fantastic. Thank you all. We're going to go to the next question, and I want to just do a little preamble on this. If any of you are in the process of a conversation about that has to do with moving your organization forward, whether it's your staff or your board or maybe industry stakeholders, what have you, responses to this next question hopefully will be helpful to you. When we think about evolving to the destination organization of the future, I was actually talking to somebody yesterday about that, who's a destination leader, and she went like this and said, oh, it's just overwhelming to think about what that would even mean for us. And that got me to thinking that there might be a few of you in the room today, when you think about this idea of the destination organization of the future, it's almost like a dim the lights and cue the music. It's like, the Almighty is going to come down and give you this silver bullet. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but I think you're going to hear some good ideas from this next round. So let me ask the question. When you think about the destination organization of the future, what does this mean to you in practical terms? In what ways is the destination organization of the future different from the destination organization, let's say, of now or the past? Sina, we'll start with you.
I think that's a big question, but I guess I think we've already had some of the answers in the panel in the first round of questions. I think one is that community comes first, and then it's about the connection with community, and that you're defining the destination, that which you call destination, you're defining that in reflection of the values of your community, and not necessarily in the reflection of demand or visitor demand.
Heads and beds.
Heads and beds, yeah, something like that. So I think that's one. I think also something that will change are new partnerships, like different kinds of partnership, maybe also unlike partnerships that you've seen before, collaboration, because I think some of the challenges, and Jos was saying that yesterday in the brief presentation he gave on screen for the Global All-Stars, he was saying there is no blueprint for every destination, so we need to learn from each other. But in a sense, we are all dealing with the same challenges. And so I think, and that goes for small and big and urban and non-urban, and like some of these challenges are kind of shared, and we've also all been part of creating them. So I think in that sense, there may not be a blueprint, but I think this is really sort of the era of the collaborative advantage more than the competitive advantage. And so once a solution is figured out in one place, let's share it and do it everywhere. So I think that's something that will change, that we've been so good at creating the business of tourism in our destinations for many years. And I think now we need to change that mindset a little bit and say either we all win or we all lose in this game that we're in right now.
I'm curious for you, is it safe to say that we're kind of all building this as we go?
I think in many ways we are.
Yeah,
I think so.
And that's okay.
I think that's okay, yeah. But I do think that we're heading to a future of much more open source solutions, and that doesn't just go for technology. I think that's really where we're heading in the way that we work, and I think that's why we have panels like this as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Antonia.
Well, we talk a lot about reinventing ourselves, and I feel I'm doing that almost every day these days. That also applies to our organizations, I believe. And if I look at our organization, yeah, we do have a new mandate. Our supervisory board is on board, so that's a very positive thing. It took a while, and our federal government just recently approved of our current status and where we are in the process of making a transition, but we don't know how long the process will be. And like Jos said, there is no blueprint, and I so agree. And I think that can make us nervous too, because if you don't know where you're going, psychologists are saying that's one of the worst things for a human being, that insecurity. The good thing is, and you refer to that as well, we've done a lot in the past. There's a lot of good history there. So if we can build on that, but there are a couple of criteria we definitely have to work on. The purpose of our organizations is going to change. That's inevitable. Our mission needs to be revamped, and the KPIs that we are dealing with, the objectives will be adjusted. The KPIs are no longer beds, no longer arrivals, DEI KPIs, sustainability KPIs. To what extent are we meeting the SDGs? That apply to our industry, extremely important, and we are not there, but I've seen great examples and great groundwork. And this goes hand in hand, and Grayson mentioned it, with the profile of our traveler. And we did a lot of work on that, because we said the good old US traveler, and I'm sorry to say, in this case I speak for the US, but it applies to our other markets, international markets, is maybe not the traveler that really matches what we would like to achieve for the local businesses and the communities. So we did a lot of research, and we came up with a new profile of a traveler that we are now going to entice to visit our destination, where experience is important, a profound interest in local communities, being part of the local community, maybe even wanting to work there, live there. It all is going to be very important. And besides, we see ourselves as a coalition builder more than ever before, even across continents now. We just had a conversation about that. There are similarities, there's a lot of overlap, and there's a lot that we can learn from each other at the same time. Lastly, funding is a big component, and I asked Jos if I could put this out here. He said, we are currently in talks with our federal government, one of our main stakeholders, to see if we could move away from the private funding. Totally. to not feel that pressure of providing the support that we've always given, the marketing support, but to give us a little bit more freedom to operate and within, of course, a framework, still have partners, but not focus too much on partner revenues, because that was a main source of our budget in the past. That is still to be discussed. It's a long way to go, but yeah, I wanted to put it out here and think about it. So far, I think those are my suggestions.
Thank you. Grayson.
So in Canada, we have 3 levels, right? We've got the national organization, we have the provincial and territorial marketing organizations, we've got regional marketing organizations, and we have local marketing organizations that are urban, rural, and remote. So we've got quite a spectrum, and the thing that you will also notice is there's such a varying level of maturity across. So when I speak, I just want to make sure that I'm acknowledging that there is all of that. So this, it's not linear, it's not prescriptive, it is intended to be just good practice and just guidelines on the things. So at a city level or an urban level or local level is the closest to the ground. It is the opportunity for you to get that feedback from the community, and it's incumbent on you to get that information because it's the only way that that information feeds up to know what can be done. You also have the opportunity to influence and inform communities and be informed and be influenced by what's going on from a social, cultural, indigenous lens on what's happening and be able to inform the levels up. At a provincial, territorial, regional level, it's the ability to coordinate and get all of that information. And if you want to make a collaborative approach on something, so let's say there's a need for infrastructure, like a road that needs to connect a few destinations together, that's where a provincial organization gets to kick in and do the things that they do. So going to Senya's point, that's collaboration right there. So it's looking beyond your own local DMO. Somebody else is helping you look beyond that one. And at as a national level, our job is to make sure that we are not stepping on anybody's toes, right? We're truly in the business of working together, being in complement with whatever is going on, creating fertile conditions, fostering dialogue, and that if that involves us doing research so that we can get the best federal programs and policies so we have the ability to influence that, we create that. Our colleagues, my colleague at Destination Canada, who is in the data side of things, is creating a Canadian data collective on tourism data to ensure that we can offer this data to our partners so that each and every one of them is not doing the same kind of work. But there's so much opportunity that's sitting there. It's just, we're just slowly cranking at each other. So I would say that at all levels, you have something to get done. As Trevor, you mentioned, just do something. Like as long as you're here, you're present, you're already in the right place. And now it's just leapfrogging from that place.
Thank you. Adam, what's going through your mind?
That it's hard going last with this group. Because yes. I would think 4 key points. The first one is, and this may be a bit controversial, but that's never stopped me. I would argue that we are not destination management organizations. And I think that's dangerous for a couple of reasons. I think we have to acknowledge what we can and cannot control directly. We really have more of a role in influencing and convening and driving conversation. But I think there's a danger in calling ourselves a destination management organization, because even to our own community, I think that sets up an expectation that we are empowered and responsible for actually bringing about things like solving homelessness, solving congestion from traffic, getting new infrastructure.
Social impact.
We can't do those single impact things. I would argue we need to leapfrog to becoming destination stewardship organizations, because fundamentally I think this is about being responsible stewards of our communities. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is I think we should leverage our strengths, because ultimately I think what every destination of any size is all around the world is first and foremost we're storytellers. And we devote a tremendous amount of energy telling our story to consumers. We don't devote that same amount of energy telling our story to our community. And so that's a pretty easy shift to make because we all, I think, have very strong communications and marketing teams. It's a matter of applying that strength toward how we tell our story to our community, but I think it has to be done with complete authenticity. I think we have to know who we are as a destination and stay completely true to that. The third thing is, I think it's what we said yesterday, but I think it bears repeating, is we have to become resident-centric organizations. What's good for residents is good for visitors. The converse does not always hold true.
Can you say that again?
What's good for residents is good for visitors. The reverse is not always true. And I think that's part of the problem. When you look at things strictly from the lens of what's good for the consumer, you can actually do things that are detrimental to your community, and that's when you put your industry completely in opposition to your community. And then the last thing I would say is adopt a much broader lens when we talk about sustainability, because certainly there's the existential issue of climate change, and we're already potentially too late to bring about some of the changes we needed to. So we need to act with a sense of dire urgency on that. But I would say think of sustainability as the long-term sustainability of your community, because that then gets into things like workforce development, educational opportunities, addressing things like homelessness. Whatever the key issues for your community are, that's where you can be making a difference.
Fantastic, and I think there are a lot of implications for leadership in everything that I heard, and becoming an expert at influencing that which you can't control. And I think that's a big challenge for leaders, and it's part of the journey, and it's part of the courage, I think, that it takes to actually move all of this forward. I'd like to check in with the audience and at this point and see, are there any questions that have popped up for anybody? I would welcome them. Yes. Fantastic. I'm going to do my best to paraphrase so everyone can hear this. The question is about governance models, since the traditional governance models has been so much about the funders, which is sometimes hotels and what have you, and maybe a little bit slower to be willing to change. What is the panel's opinion on how to think about opening up the governance model in a way that actually complements what it is that we're trying to accomplish here? Adam.
Yeah, I'll give a very real-life example of it, because you're right. I mean, sometimes the governance structure gets in the way. And that's exactly what happened to us when we realized that we really did want to do a better job in terms of diversifying our board. I think if you look back at our history, when our TID was formed, they were very new. So there was a very legitimate concern that the Tourism Improvement District wanted to make sure that the city couldn't somehow encroach on those funds. So there was a bylaw put in place over a decade ago that 51% of our board had to be general managers or owners of hotels in the city of Los Angeles, to your point about funders. Well, you fast forward in a decade further, and it actually had become an impediment to us further diversifying the board because, I mean, let's be honest, even in the hotel space today, a lot of GMs look like this guy, right? So you're not going to be really able to diversify the board. For us, the way we approached it was looking at aligned interests. So it would be wonderful to say, we're doing it because we believe it's the right thing to do to address the systemic inequities within our society. What we did is we approached it from a business standpoint, because there is so much evidence, whether it be in academia or business case studies, that shows that more inclusive organizations dramatically outperform those that aren't, that we are absolutely competing for talent in a way we never have before. And if we don't have a more inclusive talent pool, we're going to be very limited in our success. And we also put it in a customer-facing lens, which is increasingly so many of our customers, particularly on the group side and especially among leisure travelers, millennials and Gen Z, are looking at what are a community's values. So they're looking at our board of directors to say, is it a representation of the Los Angeles community? And if you see a lot of white male faces, that's not going to bode very well for our ability to sell the destination to groups and even encourage a younger generation of travelers. So we actually used that to get our bylaws changed. So about 3 months ago, we changed our bylaws. It opened up 12 new seats on our board, and it required changing the governance, but we did it in terms of meeting people where they were and framing it as a business argument.
And now it's a mandate,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Thank you for the question. Anybody else with a question? Questions are good. Yes, there's one right here, and there's a mic coming to you, just so you know, right behind you.
Morning, Trevor. Hi, everyone. Thank you. There's not a DMO in this room that hasn't thought to themselves at some point, I wish I could blow this organization up and start over. And the fascinating thing to me about that is that none of us are capable of doing that, right? We have too much history. There's too much sort of systemic stuff built in with the organization. So, Trevor, you asked a question a few minutes ago, which I thought was really good. Like, what are the practical things that you can do? What's the first thing that any one of you might suggest to any one of the DMOs in this organization that might like to blow up but can't? What should they do first?
And we'll go 30 seconds or less for each person. Thank you for the question.
Well, I think there's a really exciting example happening right now with a DMO that kind of it blew itself up from within, or whatever the expression is, in Vancouver Island, which changed their mandate to become a social enterprise. I think that's exciting. I also hear a lot of criticism that, yeah, it's not going to work and it's not going to. I think let's just be excited that someone did it, and let's see what works and doesn't, and take inspiration from it. I think that's really, really exciting. So, yeah, I don't know if that was 30 seconds, but I think there are some things happening. And then I think the other thing is really reorganizing based on what you want to achieve. So I was the lead strategist in Copenhagen in 2017 when we announced the end of tourism and welcomed the new era of localhood. And it was exciting and lots of new stuff happening, and it became people-based growth and all these things. But looking back now, what we should have done is we should have fundamentally changed how the organization worked and the department structure and all these things, because only then I think also the organization would have adopted this whole new mindset, because everyone kind of got it, but then when you came to work the day after, everything still looked the same. So something, like you said, the first step I think could maybe be that simple, like then change according to the new goals that you've set, and some will probably change again, because that's the world we live in. But yeah.
And you can read about the Vancouver example in Skift. It just came out. I think they started that experiment, if you will, in April, so they're pretty new.
Well, we didn't blow ourselves up yet, but we did very critically look at our structure and where our foreign offices were located, what kind of staff we had, because we believe that also, we look outside, but we have to really take a close look inside, and what skills and capabilities do we have available to achieve our new objectives, and do the people whom we have on board, are they all on the same page? So I think making sure that your message is understood internally is extremely important, and especially if you have an organization with offices in different places, or nomads working from who knows where, maybe Amsterdam. Make sure that we all understand where, what the priorities are, and that the philosophy has definitely changed.
Thank you, Antonia. Grace.
So for Destination Canada, we work under the CTC Act, and there are 4 elements to it, and one of them is marketing, and the other 3 are social cultural vibrancy, creating employment, generating revenues for the Government of Canada and for the people of Canada. So for the last couple decades, we've only focused on one of those 4, and I have to give credit to the wisdom of our board and our CEO, the couple years ago that they said that we were going to exercise the full mandate. And in that is where they created my position, the business unit destination development. So I would say that was a really big point, and give credit to a board. Like they're not blind to what's going on. So I would say that was awesome. We worked on a new aspiration that was creating wealth and well-being for all the peoples of Canada. It was And the plurality of that is a very important aspect of it. And in secondary is where we say, and in that, we will enrich the lives of our guests. So it's very important that we put the community first. That was a shift. And I would say that we came up with 6 outcomes to meet those things, about businesses being prosperous, culture being vibrant, tourism jobs being coveted, so that we keep talking about jobs and labor shortage. Let's make it exciting to be working in this industry. The environment, like what is it that we're going, how do we manage green capital? It's important to, especially in Canada, it's huge. It's a huge aspect, it's a huge asset for us. But what are we actually doing about it to increase that one? Indigenous people have agency over their tourism, and that was fundamental shift for us in the way we saw the things, and to be able to say that they have agency over the storytelling, and we will market what they want us to market. We're not going to do that for them. And the last one, which is going back to guests, that whatever in all of those things that we have focused on, community, residents, our internal stakeholders, that we're creating these exciting things for guests to come back and not just experience it once, but hopefully they keep coming back and at least keep talking about the stories that we've done it well, if not best.
Adam, we have this much time left.
This much. So going back to your question about blowing things up, I think about the way they do building demos in Vegas, right? They can bring down an entire building, but it's a series of small controlled explosions. So I'd say we can blow the joint up, but we got to do it with small controlled explosions. But I think that also requires a greater tolerance for risk. I think the best way I would define it is our industry is very willing to take a risk as long as you can prove to me it'll work before you do it.
There you go.
Right? So I think we have to recognize that one of my favorite quotes is from a guy named Nicholas Negroponte, who founded MIT's Innovation Lab. He said, "Success is the process of systematic error management." And I think that's what we need to lean into. There is no such thing as a failure. There are just things we learn from. So I think managed risk, that's the way we really move things forward.
Thank you. How about a hand for our panel? Thank you all very much. Great wisdom and insight. Just a couple of quick things. I want to remind everybody of the Time for Democracy study. We're going to have some initial results coming out in November, if I understand correctly, so be on the lookout for that. And also want to remind you about the resources that are available to everyone. If you want to take a picture of this, all the conference information, certainly from that are tied to this topic and others, can be found at milespartnership.com/future DMO. Thank you again. And remember, any mountain is conquered one step at a time. We've got a mountain ahead of us, but we can do it if we do it all. I'll take all these steps together. Thank you for your time today. Enjoy the rest of the conference.